that we have had a chance to see Sean today. Rashonda, let's start with you. Seeing those young black females, young girls on the ground, handcuffed in Colorado, your thoughts on that?
I was infuriated. I actually saw it last night about 1 a.m. and couldn't go to sleep. I just imagine my own daughters. I imagine, daughters of people I know. I mean, just seeing these children on the ground, there was no absolutely justification. And I know the the chief is trying to say that that's how they're trained, but I just don't see how you see a car full of young girls as a threat. And if you do, then you might need some more training.
Ashton?
I echo what the black woman said. The reality is that just should not have ever happened. That is use of excessive force. It's probably hot out there. They're on that concrete. We don't know what kind of health conditions they have. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We don't know what they could have been exposed to and many factors that will relate to that. But what about the mental anguish that these kids had to go through? I watched the video and I listened to it and I actually had tears in my eyes like many other times, but this hit different. I heard children in fear for their life because somebody stopped a van, a cops stopped the van when they should have been stopping someone for a stolen motorcycle. And that's a very dangerous thing. It just reminds me of when I moved here as an evacuee of Hurricane Katrina and I got stopped by HPD. And when my partner at the time asked for the description, it was a guy that looked the total opposite from me with a totally different outfit. They were just profiling people from NOLA. And so I can only imagine how those babies felt being on that ground and their auntie being there fearing for her life and their life, just trying to go where they were going. It wasn't right.
Look at this go so wrong in so many different directions. Obviously, it was an old case where a car was stolen early in the year and completely recovered. Then it involves the license plate of a motorcycle from another state. And then you have officers, and then there are female officers out there with no compassion for these young black girls, and they have them on the ground handcuffed. How could all of that go so wrong?
I think what hits the nail on the head is the lack of compassion. And I think when officers behave poorly, it is typically because they're not perceiving the people they're treating poorly as fellow human beings. And oftentimes it is race that is the driver of this false perception. And there are other factors as well, the tribalism of law enforcement. But when you look at young women, and as a father to a daughter, and as a former police officer, it's just really absolutely horrifying because there's a huge difference between making a mistake and then treating someone horribly. I one time pulled over a vehicle late at night. A car had robbed a store, and it was a Geo Metro with a partial plate. And I pulled over a purple Geo Metro with a partial plate. I pulled it over blocks away from the incident, occupied 3 times, just like the robbers. They were Hispanic males, just like the robbers. And it's a terrifying situation, but it was not them, right? And so my interaction, once you learn, but you still have to treat people like a human being, even when you think, the odds in my situation were so infinitesimally small that it wasn't them, but you still treat them like human beings until you find out, right? And as an officer, it is not uncommon for cars to be not cleared after they were reported stolen. This is a common mistake. We saw the flip side of this in Florida, where a woman was being very ugly to an officer in Tampa. In fact, she was in a stolen car. And he behaved very appropriately. He stayed at his car. He did have his gun out, and there was some objection to it, but I think but he had his gun pointed at the ground, and he de-escalated until other officers got there, and they ascertained that, in fact, it was a stolen car, despite this woman's objections. And she was younger. She was 23. But that officer, the whole time, treated her like a human being, despite her being ugly to him, singing, "You're going to lose your job," somebody walking up and being ugly. Officers are at work. People are not. These girls were not. And unless we do create this new paradigm where officers are expected to treat people like human beings all the time or get fired, we're not going to change anything.
Now, Charles, I know you didn't agree totally with what Dr. Raymond Winbush from Morgan State University said some months ago here on the Factor incident. Ashton, you remember that. The whole conversation about being subhuman and not seeing, in some instances, not seeing black people as human beings.